Well, welcome to Broccolittia, or Carrawbrough as it's known today. I'm just going to take a short walk along the wall and finish up at Salernum, which is Chester's. Going to video it all the way, see if we can see some exciting things, and we'll see how I get on. So, leaving Broccolittia behind me, we're heading off past the car park, and underneath it two buildings were actually discovered, one possibly a mausoleum or temple. Given the choice, I always prefer to walk west to east with the rain and wind at my back, but thankfully today that looks unlikely. Now we view the vallum again, a huge monumental earthwork of ditch and bank, about 35 metres across, which seems to have formed the southern part of the Roman military zone on Hadrian's Wall. Now it's time to climb a stile, one of the many that we will cross today, and we cross the military road, which was built in the 18th century, and the Roman wall actually runs underneath the road there. It was used as a foundation when the road was hastily thrown up between Carlisle and Newcastle. The road builders utilised the straightness of the Roman wall beneath it, so the traffic can be quite fast on this stretch, so care really needs to be taken. Hadrian's Wall itself is a complex beast. We have the North Ditch, then the Curtain Wall with its towers, forts and mile castles. Behind that sat the military way, which serviced the various buildings along the wall. We also have the vallum, which sat to the south and formed the southern edge of this whole military monument. Following the Hadrian's Wall path here, we get a really good view of the North Ditch, remarkably surviving very well in the landscape. As the Roman builders were busy digging the North Ditch, they piled a lot of the soil and rock onto the north side, creating an upcast mound. This in effect gave the ditch a greater depth and also made it more difficult for any attackers to try and cross it and attack the wall itself. So, yet another stile. We've passed the location of Turret 30A, which has long since been taken away by the road, and we're now on our way to Limestone Corner, which lies just ahead of us. Limestone Corner isn't in fact made of limestone, it's actually 300 million year old dolerite, which is an igneous rock formed underground, although limestone does exist nearby but not on this site. It must have been tough work for the Roman builders trying to cut through this volcanic rock. Some of the boulders still lie in the ditch, over 13 tons in weight, with the wedge marks still visible in the top. It's always been said that this part of the North Ditch was left unfinished because of the tough work. Although a ditch does continue along, it's certainly not as deep as this section. It's sometimes difficult to get a handle on the length of time Hadrian's Wall has existed and the time that has passed. Here, looking down on the wedge marks left by the quarrymen, you really get a sense of just one moment in time in this whole story of Hadrian's Wall in the North Ditch. Hadrian's Wall is robbed out here, but we do get to see the rubble just as a low mound in front of the dry stone wall just as we walk past it now. It's worth sticking your head over the wall at this point just to see the remains of Mile Castle 30 in the field beyond. The eastern wall is still visible, some stone just appearing under the turf. The path takes us along the edge of the berm, which formed a small piece of land between the wall and the ditch itself, used about 6 metres. At this point here, the North Ditch has really been attempted but not really finished. It's just a faint, low hollow in the ground. Hadrian's Wall on our left is badly robbed out now, but the wall course still survives as a low mound in the landscape. Now we reach the trig point, and this was placed here by the Unknown Survey and marks the most northerly point on Hadrian's Wall as it continues its journey onwards towards the Tyne. So we continue to follow the remains of Hadrian's Wall on our left, and we approach Turret 29B, which was excavated in 1912. The turret itself didn't survive into the 3rd century. It was demolished by the Romans along with a number of other turrets they obviously deemed as unnecessary. It's nice to see the gorse in bloom growing in the north ditch. We're now approaching a good section of Hadrian's Wall called Black Carts. Only the 2 outer walls would have actually been mortared together. The inner section of the wall would have been a mixture of rubble, soil and clay just to bond everything together. It's the Ministry of Works, as they've excavated the wall and rebuilt it in places using fallen stones, that they've added cement into the middle section. It seems the intention was to build Hadrian's Wall at about 3 metres wide, but at some point during the building they actually reduced the width to what they called the narrow wall, which was around 2.5 metres wide, and in some cases actually under 2 metres. This was obviously to speed up the process. So another couple of stiles to cross. This lane goes off to the little hamlet of Simonburn, which if you get the chance is well worth going and checking out. Hadrian's Wall was a military building project made of coarse blocks, possibly rendered or plastered on the outside, although evidence is very limited for what the wall actually looked like when it was standing. It was never designed to stand for the thousands of years that it has, and in certain places it collapsed and needed constant rebuilding over the Roman period. It's thought that 3 legions took part in building the wall, the 2nd, the 6th and the 20th, with auxiliaries and part of the Roman navy actually building the ditch and vallum. Testament to popularity of the wall that litter does get left behind intentionally or unintentionally. It's worth picking it up if you can, just to do your duty and keep the wall nice and neat. We've reached the turret of Black Carts, which survives remarkably well. Coins as late as Constantine in the 4th century have been found in the excavations. You can see the door with its sill and upright and pivot hole for the door still in situ. Excavation of the turrets, quite often you find cooking material, sometimes metalworking. It shows the everyday life a soldier would have had on duty in the turrets. The north ditch at Black Carts was cut through solid rock again, but only to a minimum depth. Wouldn't have provided much of an obstacle to an attacker. We see the vallum again at Black Carts, indicating that Romans perceived the threat from the south as well as the north in this landscape. Hadrian's Wall at this point isn't visible, but the north ditch keeps us company as we keep heading towards Milecastle 29 in this section. Milecastle 29 just ahead of us is a rather forlorn sight, its earthworks revealing its robbed out state. Despite the extensive stone robbing, you can still see the shape of the Milecastle in the landscape. It's one of those rare Milecastles which actually has a ditch dug round it. It's difficult to know if the ditch was dug as a defensive measure, or perhaps there was a water issue because the Milecastle was on a slope that needed to be addressed. The Mile Castle would have had a north and a south gate to allow the free movement of troops, probably held around 8 to 16 auxiliaries who were manning the wall. The troops would have lived here on rotation from one of the forts along the wall, possibly in this case Chester's in the valley below. Once the crowns of England and Scotland were united, the border wars that had long since plagued the area ceased to be a problem, and stone robbing started in earnest as people started to build barns and farms along the route. Roman stone for centuries has been repurposed for castles, barns, foundations of roads. Not for the first time, the path then continues over the North Ditch, and we carry on walking on the north side of Hadrian's Wall for a while. The North Ditch is around 8 metres wide and 3 metres deep, and was V-shaped in profile. It ran the entire length of Hadrian's Wall, apart from the crags in the central section where it just wasn't needed. Certain sections of the North Ditch were never completed. Archaeologists have found the mounds of soil tipped out and waiting to be redistributed along the upcast mound of the north section. Other sections, like Limestone Corner, simply proved too tough to get through. It just leaves us with stories we can probably never answer, just speculation. After crossing the Stile here, we actually join the line of the Roman military way, which serviced Hadrian's Wall behind it. It was built in around about AD 159 or somewhere after that, and when the Romans returned from the Antonine Wall, which they abandoned about the same time.
For all you Hadrian's Wall geeks out there, I know there are a few, well, turret 28B is roughly in this area here, robbed away, but the ditch is still visible. There's a fine line through the middle of the buttercups.
With the uplands behind us, the landscape's getting a lot softer. We're just walking on the line of Hadrian's Wall, sadly gone from the landscape, but the North Ditch is still with us. This populated landscape continues to evolve. Some later quarries on our right hand side, just by the North Ditch. If climbing over stiles is your thing, then definitely Hadrian's Wall is the walk for you.
I'm standing on the north side, the barbarian side of the wall, if you want to call it that, and just behind me is the North Ditch, and then maybe 6 metres behind me, perhaps sometimes a little bit closer, would have been the site of the building of Hadrian's Wall in AD 122. First thing to be built would have been the turret, and there would have been one directly behind me, which is turret 28A. And the Roman builders would have built the turret, they would have added wing walls onto either side, and then the curtain wall would have been built sometime afterwards and connected it with those wing walls. Sometimes the wall became a lot narrower as they wanted to speed up the process.
At this point, Hadrian's Wall path deviates from the wall itself and does what's technically known as a dogleg to avoid Wallwick Hall, which we pass the back wall of. At Wallwick Hall, archaeologists recently uncovered a section of the Roman military way which just ran behind Hadrian's Wall and serviced the mile castles, turrets and forts. So over yet another stile, and this time we take a right and head south to rejoin Hadrian's Wall again. As we rejoin the wall at Wallwick, a little hamlet, you get an idea of where some of the Roman stone may have gone looking at the old buildings as we pass. Many of the stones taken from Hadrian's Wall were carved or had names on them, known as building stones or centurial stones. It's worth keeping an eye out as you're doing the path for these blocks, which are sometimes built into the outer walls of the houses. Returning to the main military road, we pass the early 18th century house of Little Wallwick. Rather a grand property it is too. At this point, Hadrian's Wall runs right under my feet under the road, and the north ditch sits just in front of the house. A remarkable illustration done in 1862 at this point actually shows the foundation of Hadrian's Wall built into the track as it runs down the hill. Now it's sadly under tarmac and no longer visible. Just ahead over the field wall stands the site of Mile Castle 28 with the military way running down the field. Passing the rather grand entrance to John Clayton's house built in 1771. Clayton, an industrialist, did much to save Hadrian's Wall from destruction by buying up large sections of the wall. It's him we have to thank for preserving Chester's Fort, Vindolanda and many other stretches of Hadrian's Wall. It's hard to imagine if Clayton hadn't have bought up these sections what would have happened to them.
I've now reached Chester's Fort, or Salernum as the Romans would have known it, and I'm going to take the bus back to where I'm staying on Hadrian's Wall, and this is the AD 122 bus. An amazing resource, runs through the summer, goes to all the major sites, goes to Haltwhistle railway station, to Hexham railway station, so you've no excuse not to use it to travel along the wall and do linear walks.
Time to head inside Chester's Fort, now run by English Heritage, grab a cup of tea and have a wander around this fascinating site. If you've enjoyed this video, why not like and subscribe, add a comment, and I'll see you on the next journey I take.